Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday to join us again for another session with Dr. Christena Cleveland. To begin our session this afternoon, Reverend Kate Hogue is going to open us in prayer.
I always find that Zoom meetings, it's sometimes difficult to begin to be engaged. So I would invite everyone to take a big breath and give a good stretch. And let's begin with a word of prayer. Holy One, you meet us here today. We who come from different perspectives and locations, diverse communities and congregations. We are here now with a united purpose: to sit and listen, question and wonder, learn and grow. Oh God, you know that growth can be painful and sometimes beautiful. We who long to rush towards let there be light and lightheartedness, we miss something life-giving in your darkness. It was in the blackness of the beginning that your creativity flourished and you birthed all that is. In the darkness of the tomb, you dreamed up resurrection, unseen. We sit in darkness today to be challenged and conflicted, open-hearted and uncomfortable. Help us reckon with our complicity and the harm we have caused. Give us the courage to confess and lament, the strength to repair what can be mended, and the energy to break down what must be dismantled. Tend in us that which is good and just and faithful and true. Transform and resurrect us over and over and over again. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Welcome back again, everyone. It is again my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Christena Cleveland. She is a social psychologist, a public theologian, author, and activist. She is the founder and director of the Center for Justice and Renewal, which she began to tell us a little bit about during our session this morning. It's a nonprofit dedicated to helping justice advocates sharpen their understanding of the social realities that maintain injustice while also stimulating the soul's enormous capacity to resist and transform those realities. Dr. Cleveland holds a PhD in social psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, as well as an honorary doctorate from the Virginia Theological Seminary. She's an award-winning researcher and author, is a Ford Foundation Fellow who has held faculty positions at several institutions of higher education, most recently at Duke University's Divinity School, where she led a research team investigating self-compassion as a buffer to racial stress. One line of her bio that I missed in reading this morning was the last one. A bona fide tea snob, lover of Black art, and Olafur Arnold superfan, Christena makes her home in the wild high desert of northern New Mexico. And I had to look up who Olafur Arnold is, and I'm going to go back and listen to some of that music because that is really cool. I'm glad that that is included in there. Dr. Cleveland, welcome back. Thank you so much for giving of your time and your presence to be with us this day. I will turn this over to you. We will have time for question and response at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and type those in either the Q&A or in the chat if you're having problems with the Q&A, and we will hold those for the end of the session. Dr. Cleveland, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you again for the introduction. That was wonderful. I would like to start with another prayer because I think it's not possible to do too much deepening and spiritual strength training. So if we could just take a couple deep breaths and settle into our bodies. It's afternoon here where I am in Miami. And so, it's kind of like that prime nap time. So sometimes the breath keeps me alert and connected and in my body. So just taking a couple deep breaths, and I'm going to pray a prayer by a friend of mine who's also a spiritual teacher. Her name is Pixie Lighthorse. She is a Choctaw spiritual teacher from Oklahoma. And this is her prayer of honoring worth. So just allow the liturgy to wash over you and just continue breathing and being in your body as I pray this prayer for honoring worth. Thank you for this day of knowing our value. It is not for others to reflect our merits back at us. You have tried to transmit this to us many times, but it is hard to hear and easily forgotten. Please help us remember that it is a miracle to be here, and that to disregard the miracle is to misunderstand life. Each of us has purpose, and we don't have to be in full comprehension of that to earn our place here. Drum into ourselves that we get to be here without anxiety, that we are enough. Expand our limits for accepting our majestic existence. Let us hang the medals of honor on our own jackets and stop questioning whether we do enough and give enough. Open us to our flaws and imperfections, because our obsession with perfection is killing our spirit and our faith in divine love. When hunger for external affirmation is insatiable, it complicates and compromises our relationships. Help us to let our people off the hook for needing to scout the ideal words that will lead to our fulfillment. Freedom from inaccurate beliefs about ourselves is between you and us. Help us discover how we can be most useful, knowing that our significance is not rooted in our doing. Remove thoughts that we are burdensome or a hindrance to those around us, and that our gifts will not be appreciated. Help us create meaningful lives that bring dignity to our spirit and establish trust with you that we are right on path. When we are dependent on others, let us seek self-sufficiency in order to keep our relationships in balance. Help us to define the value of how we show up and what we contribute. Let us understand that contributions are not synonymous with currency, and that lives cannot be measured in dollars. When we are not honoring our missions, direct us back to them. Point our generosity and kindness facing outward, knowing that everything that flows from us creates a ripple effect. Remind us that it is possible to create unworthiness in others when we set unfair and impossible standards for ourselves. Let adequate and good enough be sufficient despite our efforts for excellence. Highlight our benevolence, because big-heartedness is what we will be remembered for above all. Help us to know and trust that we are beneficial organisms in the great cosmic layout. Amen and ashe. Let's take a deep breath. That is from Pixie Lighthorse's book of prayers called Prayers for Honoring Voice. She has several prayer books. One of them I would actually recommend that relates to the lament and grief process that we talked in the session earlier today. It's called Prayers for Honoring Grief, or Prayers of Honoring Grief. And actually I think it's really beautiful because so much of us have been so disconnected from our bodies and from our ancestral practices of grief and lament that we don't even have the words to describe how we feel or want to feel. And so that prayer book has like 30 or 40 prayers of different facets of grief and lament that we can just allow, kind of usher us into that process. It's really beautiful. Prayers of honoring grief. Well, part of the reason why I wanted to start with that prayer is because it's grounding to me, especially that line, let adequate and good enough be sufficient despite our efforts for excellence. If you know the Enneagram at all, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. So I'm like, oh, I just want to be excellent all the time. And I am excellent all the time in my own way. So that's one reason. But another reason is because it reminds me, even though she has prayers that speak much more specifically to justice, to advocacy, that prayer reminds me of how integrated the justice work is with spirituality. Because in order for me to stay connected and leaned into this conversation, to foster hope, to keep coming back, I have to have a spirituality that sustains me, that tells me I'm a beneficial organism. I have gifts that matter in this conversation, in this work. I don't need other people to necessarily hang the medals of honor on my jacket. I can do that for myself. I can come with an openness and not a neediness. And just realizing those are all things that are really hard to do. It's really hard to not make it about you in justice work, because we come with so many questions about our worth to begin with. And so I just love that prayer and how it reminds me I can always go back to my divine source for this worth, and that sets me free to have these healthy relationships that are in balance as I do this work. And before I go into specifically talking about how we are all beneficial organisms in this great cosmic layout, even as it relates to anti-racism work in the church, every single one of us matters. I cannot overemphasize that enough. This is an all hands on deck question. And an issue, and everyone's needed. And oftentimes, especially when I was talking more about privilege than I do now, I would get these emails, I'd write these I wrote a blog series, like listening well as a person of privilege, that kind of went to a lot of places on the internet. And so I'd get these emails from people saying, I'm a white man, I'm upwardly mobile, I'm formally educated, I have leadership positions, I'm good looking, I'm all the things that give me privilege, cisgender, heterosexual. So I don't even know what to do with what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act? How am I supposed to play a role? It just kind of sounds like you're just naming me as privileged, and then it's like, okay, get out of the way, you privileged people, or something like that. I got that email over and over and over again. And I always thought how it was so interesting that people would name their sort of demographics, I'm white, I'm male, I'm all these things. And then they would always add, oh, and I'm good looking too. And I'd be like, really? Because I don't see a picture here. I feel like I should be the one to determine that. But it's true. I talk about in a lot of my work that looks, according to the white patriarchal standard, matter. They're a marker of privilege. And so I started realizing, I know exactly what you need to do. I know exactly what role you have to play. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the early parts of the role, before we can even get to what to do, is how to be aware. How do we actually lean in to what, especially those of us who have some sort of influence in the church, whether as long-term lay members or as clergy, what is going on? And I know I was, I quit my job about a year and a half ago at Duke. But up until that, I was living in the South, and I was experiencing white Christianity in the South, which was really new to me as a California girl who was then educated mostly in New England. I was able to see the way, not that the church in the North and the West is less complicit, but I was able to see some very just intense, ugly things about the church in the South. And when you're the reconciliation professor at Duke, you'd be surprised at the people who just show up at your office hours. Like one day, Robert E. Lee, the sixth or something, came to my office hours, unannounced, not a student, not even affiliated with me, and just was like, help. Like, and I was like, this is way beyond my pay grade here. And so I had lots of experiences like that. We actually ended up taking my name off of my door because of the unsolicited people who would come to my office hours who were not students. So one day this guy shows up at my office hours. He looks really ragged and haggard, like he hadn't slept in a while. He's a white man. He had driven through the night out of urgency to come get help for me. And he's a pastor of a prominent church. I don't want to give away the name, but just if you had to name like the 5 most historically racist churches in the history of the United States, like this would be one of them. There's a major racist institution that this church was essentially the patron church of. And so really there's very little that has gone on in this incredibly racist, famous institution that this church, its elders, its people were not part of. They go hand in hand. And so this pastor, a white man who didn't really know he was white, he was from a major city. So he kind of knew, okay, I think it's a problem that people on my elder board are like the head of the KKK in our county. Like, I'm just guessing that's a problem. So he didn't even know the more subtleties of white supremacy, but he was just like, these people are racist. Like, they literally want to kill Black people. And they are the ones who are running my church. And he didn't know this until he ended up at the church. So he drove through the night and was at my office and was just like, help me, I have to figure out what to do. And I sort of half jokingly said to him, are you Pentecostal? Because you need to convert to Pentecostalism, like right now. Like, you need all the tongues, you need all the prayer shawls, you need all the oils. Like, and I really was just half joking because I was like, I'm not sure you know what you're up against. Like, there's a good chance that you will be killed physically if you start to address the inherent racism in your church. Your kids will be harassed at school. They might be kidnapped. At the very least, you'll lose your job. Like, do you really know have you counted the costs of doing anything? And this story is still, and he hadn't, so yeah, I mean, that's not surprising. But the story, I always shiver a little bit when I think of him because I think there are ways in which the church has been so complicit in white supremacy that escape many of us because we're not in those particular spaces. And so part of waking up is just realizing these historical collaborations not only exist, but many of them are still alive and well in our denominations. You know, it might not be our particular parish, but these situations are still happening even in 2020. And we see that a lot with just went down in Charlottesville a couple years ago, and the ways that churches were not either complicit themselves, like sending members and leaders, or just not really getting involved at all and not playing a role in speaking out and advocating. And so it's interesting when people say, okay, so, what do I do as this white person of privilege, of whatever measure of privilege that I have, whether I also have gender or socioeconomic status or some of these other things. And what I love about this whole question is that it's really a deeply spiritual question, and it invites us to integrate and deepen our spirituality, because there's so much in scripture that points us in this direction. We just have not ever really looked at it through the lens of whiteness, white supremacy, and anti-racism. And so one of the things that I keep returning to as I talk about privilege and some of these other, ways of moving through the world through a power lens, is returning to this story, which then we can also invite other people into as we say, this is what we're going to be about and this is why. Because it's really easy for churches to look at something like a Charlottesville or look at something like this church in the South, that's just on undisclosed Southern location, and say, oh yeah, but that's not our church. And so why do we really need to care about this? It's not that bad here. Actually, like, we're kind of friendly with all the other churches here. We even did a unity night with the Black church down the street, you know, like, as long as we're nice people and we don't participate in some of those really ugly things, we're not really part of the problem. And then to that, I would say, but we're missing out on everything that Jesus is inviting us into. And so one story that I just love is a parable that Jesus told. And I'm always amazed whenever I read this, because Jesus prefaces the story by saying, if you want to experience the kingdom of God, like, I feel like whenever Jesus really wants us to pay attention, he's like, okay, come in really closely. The kingdom of heaven is like this. And then he lays out this idea and says, if you want to experience that, if you want to experience what I'm really offering, what I came here to offer, way beyond what you've been taught by the establishment, what you've been taught by the church. If you want to experience my reality, the reality that I am brewing and creating and planting, and you want to be in on the ground, this is what it looks like. Jesus only does that a handful of times in scripture, but he does it with this particular parable. And he says, if you want to experience the kingdom of God, it's like this. A man goes out who owns a whole bunch of land, and he goes out and he wants to hire workers. And so he goes to the place where all of the day laborers are hanging out, and he hires a bunch of people, and he says, hey, I will give you, let's say, 1 coin if you work for the day. So those people get working. And then around mid-morning, this man says, you know what? There's more work to be done. We need more people. So he goes back to the place and he says, hey, everybody, if you come and work the rest of the day, I'll give you 1 coin to some of the people who are there. He picks enough of the people. And then he brings them back and they work. And then around midday, he's like, you know what? There's more work. Goes back, picks up more people, says, I'm going to pay you 1 coin. Towards the end of the day, we're talking mid-afternoon, late afternoon, he still says, we need more people. So he goes back a 4th time. There's still people there waiting. No one's picked them all day. And he says, you know what? We have a place for you. We need you. What you bring is valuable to what we're trying to do at this farm. I'll pay you 1 coin if you come work the rest of the day. And then at the end of the day, he lines everybody up, and the people who've been working all day, the people who've been working 3/4 of the day, the people who've been working a half a day, the people who've been working just an hour or two, lines everybody up and gives everybody 1 coin, which is what was promised. And what is amazing about that is the people who had been picked first were livid. They were so angry. They were like, we've been working all day, and you're paying these people the same amount that you paid us? What? That's reverse racism. How's that fair? That's affirmative action. How's that right? They were so livid. And if you think about it, who gets picked at the beginning in the job market? Who gets picked first? Who's seen as a great candidate? It's white people. There's hundreds of research studies that just having a white sounding name makes you twice as likely to get invited in for an interview than someone with a Black sounding name. So white people, it's able-bodied people, it's people who have documentation, it's people who are formally educated, it's people whose genders aren't confusing, it's people who speak the language. It's men. There's also a lot of research that shows that men tend to be hired and promoted based on their potential, but women tend to be hired and promoted based on their proven track record. Who gets picked at the beginning of the day It's all the privileged people in society. Who gets picked over and is still there at the end of the day looking for work because no one's hired them? It's all the disabled people. It's the gender expansive people, LGBTQ people, Black people, Muslims, informally educated, formally incarcerated. And so it's fascinating to me that when the people who had been picked first, the privileged people, saw that everybody else who normally they get ignored in the market were treated exactly the same as them, they were so upset. What does that say about how much those of us who benefit from systemic inequality don't really like it when all of a sudden people get to experience what we have long benefited from? But one of the things that I think is so interesting about this particular parable is afterwards, in response to these people getting super angry, Jesus makes one of his most theologically astute and important statements. In the kingdom of God, the first will be last and the last will be first. And right there, he's unlocking the pathway to justice for those of us who are wondering, what's my role to play? And so to the white man who's attractive and cisgender and het and wealthy and upwardly mobile and all the things, I would say you 100% have a role to play. And it is last. There's a seat for you at the table. This is not a circular table, which we love to think of like Knights of the Round Table when it comes to justice, where we all have a seat and everything's equal and all those sorts of things. Jesus sounds like he doesn't care at all about equality. Jesus cares about equity. Jesus is not creating a situation where everyone's equal. Jesus is like, no, the first will be last and the last will be first, which is a complete flip of the power dynamic. Now we're talking equity, not equality. And this, I just kind of giggle inside every time I think about that, because it just makes me think Jesus must be a social psychologist like me, because there's so much research in social psychology that shows that when you take existing, and I think I cite this one of these studies in my book in chapter, the last chapter, the second to last chapter, but when a lot of research shows that when two groups who have experienced systemic inequality try to come together, so one group that's had more power, so in this case they had Israelis, and then they have Palestinians, a group with less power historically and systemically, come together and try to be equal, the equality breaks down within moments, and people fall back into their existing patterns of dominance and submission. And so research shows that the best way to actually achieve equality is to flip the power dynamic. And you put the Palestinians in charge and you tell the Israelis to follow. Then it starts to approximate equality. So Jesus must have known that. And that's why he said the first have to be last and the last have to be first. This is not a round table. This is an ovular table. There is a head and there's a foot. And you privileged people, there's a seat for you at the foot. And actually, it's crucial. Because in order for the kingdom of God to come, the flip needs to happen, which means everybody needs to take their places at the correct space. We are all needed. The first will be last and the last will be first. So then the big question here is, okay, white people, if your job is to be last, what does that actually look like? Because it turns out that those of us who've been shaped by whiteness don't even know how to participate without leading and taking charge and running things. It's so hard for us. We live in a world, especially in North America, where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Literally, a factor of whiteness is to walk in like you own the place. And there's so much research that there's a really interesting book called Unequal Childhoods by a sociologist, Annette Lareau, I think is her name. But I read it and it's fascinating. And she basically shows how middle-class kids are formed to walk into spaces and if the space doesn't work for them, transform the space. But socioeconomically oppressed kids are not trained to do that. So for example, she sees middle-class parents of all races in this case. She's looking at class specifically, although obviously there's some integration and correlation with race. But in this case, she looks at all these examples of middle-class parents going into doctors' offices with their kids and coaching their kids on how to speak up and advocate for themselves with the doctor. Middle-class parents coach their kids on how to make requests of their soccer coach and expect their soccer coach to meet their expectations for what they're hoping to get out of soccer practice today. And so there's something about whiteness that is essentially shaping people to go into spaces and take charge, make it about what you need to get out of it. And the more you actually do that, the more you benefit from the white capitalistic patriarchal system. I know this because every single time I have used those practices in my life, which I was trained to do as well to a certain extent, especially in my boarding school, where literally every class was just a boardroom table and we were essentially taught to run corporate America. Every single time I use those practices, it has led to something that the capitalistic white supremacist system values. So when I was a PhD student and all my research was on team motivation, and I'm a huge baseball fan, the biggest. It's so cerebral. Oh, I just love baseball. I'm a huge A's fan, grew up watching the Bash Brothers and Ricky Henderson, and so much fun. Anyways, I decided my second year in grad school, I wanted to work for the Boston. Well, I wanted to get a job in Major League Baseball. And so I found out from a college classmate, connections, whose dad is a really important GM in baseball, that all of the general managers and team execs were going to be staying in Anaheim that weekend at the Anaheim Marriott for the big Major League Baseball winter meetings. And so I told my parents, I want to go down there and get a job. So my mom bought me a little suit. I was 24. My mom bought me a suit. I drove my car down there. I had 25 copies of my resume and a 30-second spiel on why they should hire me. And I just walked into that lobby just filled with white men in suits and was like, I just need to walk in here like I own the place. And I just started going up to people and saying, hi, I'm Christena Cleveland, here's all the reasons why you should hire me, giving out my resume to all these people. I was so intimidated. I did not belong in that space. It was so obvious. But I knew if I just walk in like I belong here, if I just make this a space for me, I will succeed. Sure enough, I got 3 different offers from teams. I ended up working for the Boston Red Sox that next season. They offered me a full-time job, and I ended up going back to grad school and getting my PhD. So I didn't end up taking that route, but I worked for them for a season. And it's like every single time I engage in these practices of being first, cha-ching, we don't even know what it means to be last. We don't even know what that is as a spiritual practice. We don't know what the holiness of being last is. And we certainly don't know what the practice is. What does that look like? Thankfully, among other things, Jesus is giving us plenty of examples. And as I mentioned earlier in the session earlier today, which was, this morning, Jesus was constantly emptying himself, this idea of kenosis, emptying oneself of your power and your privilege. That's essentially taking your seat at the foot of the table, right? This kenosis. Jesus does it by coming to earth in the flesh of a human and is like, you know what? I've been first for all eternity. I literally am the word, the word, not a word, not the second word, the first word. But I'm going to come and be last, essentially. I'm going to empty myself of all my privileges so I can be amongst you. And what's interesting about that is, as I mentioned earlier today, Jesus doesn't just do that with the incarnation, which is good for us because we don't know how to cross metaphysical planes like Jesus did. Jesus has a pattern of emptying himself over and over and over again. And one of the things I really think is interesting about Jesus and makes me connect with him even more is he has an intersectional identity. You know, we talk about intersectionality as people having all sorts of identities that intersect. So I'm Black, yes, but I'm also female, and I'm also straight, and I'm also cisgendered, and I'm also really formally educated, and all of these things intersect to make me a much more complex person, where it's not that I'm just clearly privileged or clearly oppressed. It's complicated, and that's how it is for many of us. And Jesus was no different. I mean, we often think of Jesus as being really poor and marginalized. And of course, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, Jesus identified with the groups that had been oppressed. He was a Jewish citizen he was a Jewish citizen under a Roman occupation. So yes, he could identify with oppressed groups, but he was also privileged in the sense that he wasn't Samaritan. And he makes it really clear that he had power relative to Samaritans in his society. And, we often, Jesus was born in a manger, yes, but his family was important enough to be counted in the census in a slave society, which meant he wasn't an enslaved person. He actually was a person in the Roman Empire. And so we start to see Jesus has some privilege too, relative to others. He's a man in a society where women were almost property. He's a free person and actually a business owner in a world where there are enslaved people. He's Jewish in a world where there are Samaritans. And now Jesus has a platform. So as an influencer, Jesus has power and privilege. And so one of the things I really like about this story that I'm going to invite us to look at through this lens of how is Jesus emptying himself? How does Jesus have a sociological imagination? I call it my kenotic hermeneutic. And so it's like Jesus is looking at the social dynamics. Who has power, who doesn't? Who has a voice, who doesn't? Who has a platform, who doesn't? Who's marginalized, who's not? Who's accommodated, who's not? Looking at where he is relative to that and emptying himself of his privilege and power in a way that upends the power dynamic. So Jesus takes a seat as last at the table and also invites the other powerful people to take a seat with him as last in a way that allows other folks to take a seat at the front of the table. And how can we start to look at scripture through this? Now, when I developed this hermeneutic when I was at Duke, I then went through the entire Gospels and it completely changed everything I thought I knew about Jesus. Because it turns out Jesus has a dope sociological imagination and is always aware of what's going on, who has power and who doesn't, who's on the margins and who doesn't. And he's always emptying himself. As I gave in the example earlier today, where he puts himself in between a lynch mob and this woman who'd been accused of adultery. That is an acute sense of power. Who has it, who doesn't, who's in trouble, who's not. And not just, can I sit here and analyze it and maybe do a TED Talk about it, or maybe journal about it, or tell another white person, wow, that was terrible. Jesus doesn't just do that. Jesus is like, oh no, we're about to do something. We're going to get involved. We're not going to just analyze it. We're not going to just say, yeah, it's too bad that happened. I understand the power dynamics that happened, but I didn't really do anything about it. And so in this particular story that I'm going to tell you, which is about Jairus and the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, Jesus invites the powerful people to take a seat too. And it's just fascinating. And so, and it's a great model for us as we do our own biblical study in groups. How can we start to not just see these factors, but also but emulate them. And so one of the things I really love about this particular story is it's so early in Jesus's career, his public facing career. And up until this point, everyone that Jesus has been ministering to, they're like the riffraff of society, right? So Jesus is already like riffraff adjacent, just being from Nazareth, you know? And then on top of it, because he's not an official anything, he's not formally educated, he's not like a real rabbi or anything. And so all the people who've been gathering around him, they're the most desperate people in society, right? It's the lepers, it's the people who are in sex work, it's the people who are blind, you know, it's the poor people who literally don't have enough food to like pack their own lunch, right? And so it's all these he's this rogue kind of outlaw Messiah. And like many other situations, he's surrounded by tens of thousands of people, but this time something's different. A privileged person, someone who's normally at the head of the table, Jairus, comes and asks for Jesus' help. And this is the first time in the historical record of everything we know about Jesus that this happens. Now, all of a sudden, an important person is coming and seeking the ministry of Jesus. Now, that's a big deal, because if you know anything about people who are well-resourced, they will try every possible thing before they humble themselves and do what the poor people are doing to fix their problem. This is someone who's so disconnected from the reality of the people who are usually seeking Jesus's help. And so I'm imagining, you know, Jairus has a need, right? Which just goes to show privileged people have needs too. Just because you're privileged doesn't mean life is perfect and easy. It just means that whatever pain you have is probably not due to systemic oppression, but you still have pain, right? Your mom can get cancer, you can get COVID, someone you know could die at war. I mean, there's all of these, there's individual pain and there's systemic pain, right? So Jairus has pain. He has a child who's sick. And if I know anything about privileged people, and I know a lot, Jairus had all the best surgeons already try, probably brought in some of the best healers that he could find. They tried, exhausted every possible avenue that money could buy, that power could buy. And yet, as we know, sometimes money and power can't buy everything. And so Jairus is going to humble himself, wade into a crowd of people that honestly, theologically, he probably thinks are cast-offs, you know, untouchables, go into a space where he normally would not be caught dead being in because he's so desperate. And he humbles himself before Jesus in a vulnerable way that was probably uncharacteristic of him, new to him, and saying, Jesus, I have a need. I'm that desperate. And so Jesus is like, you know, Jesus loves everyone and is like, for sure, I'll come to your house. I'll come heal your child. Let's do this. But what's fascinating about this is as Jesus is starting to move with Jairus, all eyes are on Jesus. All eyes are on Jairus because they're the ones who have privilege and power. And all these people are touching him. And this woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, we don't even have her name. We just have her malady. That's all she's known by, is her oppressed identity. This woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years touches the hem of his garment. And in all three of the synoptic gospels, it says, and the power went out of Jesus, and Jesus knew it, and the woman was healed. It's clear in all of them that she touched him, the power went out and healed her, and Jesus was aware. However, Jesus stops and he asks this rhetorical question, who touched me? I love the drama of Jesus. Jesus was extra. Jesus was definitely what we would call extra, because even his disciples are like, Jesus, that's the dumbest question ever. Everybody's touching you. Why are you asking it? But as a social psychologist, I think, why would Jesus ask that question? What is Jesus trying to do? Everyone's eyes are on Jairus and Jesus. What God is doing is centering on the most important people in society, Jairus. And by asking the question, who touched me? Jesus moves everyone's attention off of him and Jairus and onto this woman. And I love the way Mark tells it. Mark says, and the woman told her truth, her whole truth. Here's what's really interesting about this. The woman was already healed. Jairus is an important somebody who has a big need. Be good for Jesus's platform if word gets around that now all of a sudden Jesus is healing and dealing with the mucky mucks, with the important folks. But Jesus puts Jairus on hold, which is a bold move, could come back to hurt you, because when powerful people don't get what they want, they get you fired. They can get you blackballed. Because Jairus has a need. He's desperate himself. And so it's interesting that Jesus, again, empties himself in this moment at great risk to himself. But he's doing something important. He's shifting the power dynamic in this community. Now everyone is looking at this woman who's been marginalized her whole life, who's probably been homeless and cast out of her family, because typically when people have these types of disease, when people have these types of unclean diseases, their family associates it with sin, so they get kicked out. She's probably been homeless, probably hasn't had anyone in this entire community listen to her. And all of a sudden, Jesus gives her a platform and says, who touched me? And she gets to tell her truth, her whole truth. And let me tell you something. I bet it was not a tidy truth. I bet it was not linear, the way those of us who've gone to liberal arts colleges would expect. I bet it was not a TED Talk truth. She was probably like spraying it more than she was saying it. She probably did not smell good. She probably did not look healthy. She was probably calling people out, cursing people out. I was friendly with the custodians at Duke Divinity School. I say friendly because I don't know. I mean, the power difference between a faculty member and a custodian is so great. I wouldn't dare to call them friends, but I developed a relationship over the time that I was there, and they were all Black women. And at Duke Divinity School, the custodians are actually called housekeepers. That's their official title, because Duke is kind of a plantation. And so they had been there, and we got to know each other a little bit. And one of them was telling me between the four of us, there's like 50-something years of us working here at Duke Divinity School. And she said, the things that we have seen, let me tell you one thing, there's not a lot of divinity at Duke Divinity School. And it made me think about this woman who was telling her truth, her whole truth. And I said, when people who've been on the margins of society share about what they've seen and what they know to be true, it's time to listen up. Because this woman's, just like the custodians at Duke Divinity School, has probably seen a lot. And so she's telling her truth. And there's a good chance she's calling Jairus out. Because if he didn't specifically oppress her, he represents all that has oppressed her. And she's just saying it. She is just speaking out. Her whole truth is probably not a short truth. And everybody's listening, including Jesus. And I scoured all the historical commentary on this. There's no evidence anywhere that Jairus did anything to intervene, to cut her off. Okay, Jesus, I'm glad that, you healed her. Great. I still have my need. Can we hurry this along? Because, I came here and asked for your help, and it was a big deal for me to even come, and I'm desperate too, and I have pain too. And come on, let's go. Isn't that what privileged people usually do? Because we don't know how to take our seat at the foot of the table. But that's what Jesus was inviting Jairus into. Because this woman was telling her truth, her whole truth. She was preaching. She was sharing her gospel. She was taking her seat at the head of the table and leading this entire spiritual movement and moment. And by putting Jairus on hold, Jesus was doing two things. One, Jairus, listen to this woman, receive her truth, her whole truth, even the parts that make you uncomfortable. even the parts that expose you. And also, I'm going to teach you how to hold on to your pain and be present to it without needing to get rid of it. As a powerful, wealthy, rich person in this community, you very rarely had to sit with your pain and just be with it, not try to fix it, not try to get rid of it. And I don't know how long that episode went on, but it went on long enough so that word came back that Jairus' child was dead. So it might have gone on for a while if word got back that it was too late. And isn't that every privileged person's fear? Well, if I take my seat at the foot of the table, will I still be okay? Will I be safe? Will the things that matter to me still be addressed? I don't know. I mean, usually I'm the one who's at the head of the committee, and so I make sure the things that matter to me get addressed. But if I'm letting other people lead, will it be done the way that I think it should be done? Will it be effective and efficient? I hear this all the time from clergy. Well, I mean, I think that I definitely think we should have more, Black female bishops. But what about me? I mean, when I'm up for bishop, I want to have a shot. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we should have more affirmative action programs and policies that address systemic inequality. But when my kid applies, I want to make sure they get in. Yeah, I want to give sacrificially of my resources, my financial resources. But will I have enough to pay my bills too? I mean, if I really do reparations, like if I really look at how much ill-gotten wealth my family has simply because of being white, and I get serious about that, will we still be able to live in this neighborhood and drive the cars that we have and shop at the places that we get our groceries? And will my kids still be able to go to this above average public school? Because what about me? What about my pain? What about my fears? And those questions that arise all the time when I'm speaking with white people in power who want to relinquish but don't know how. They don't know how to let go of those fears. And I always wonder, I guess we don't really believe in the resurrection. Not really. We're still clinging to power, to resources, to having a voice, to having a seat at the head of the table. We don't actually believe that the movement, whatever it is, whether it's the church or a community organization or justice, will happen without us leading it. And so this is kind of every powerful person's, every first head of the table seater's fear. What about me? As justice is happening, as Jesus is doing this beautiful thing where he's upending the power dynamic, a woman is being healed physically, but her identity is also being healed because for once she's the preacher in this community that has marginalized her. For once she's the center of all that God is doing and not the people who are seen as holy and whole. There's so much happening, and this whole time, Jairus is sitting there and holding space for his pain and receiving this woman's truth. It's a lot. And then the word comes back. Jairus, your kid's dead. All his fears come true. See, I knew I couldn't believe in the resurrection. See, I knew if I took my seat at the foot of the table, I would just get silenced and stomped out. But Jesus looked at him and he said, just believe, Jairus. And I have to believe, as someone who talked about perichoresis and this model of the Trinity, that the fact that Jairus was able to believe only happened because he had just received that woman's truth. After putting all his hopes in Jesus, after putting all his vulnerability out there amongst these people that he normally wouldn't hang out with, and then seeing his worst fear come true, and then still being able to believe, that's because he was transformed in that experience. He got to participate for the first time in his life in that interdependence, where he was actually a part of a community that he had looked down on. He was receiving from that community. He was present to that community, and he had put his issues aside for a moment so he could be present. He was healed because she was healed and got to speak her truth. And his identity was healed, and he was able to believe. And then Jesus went and, of course, healed his child, because there is enough love for all of us. I'm going to stop here and give us a moment to just reflect on that. And take a bio break too. So let's take a moment to breathe, and I'll be right back. Okay, let's just take 3 deep breaths and allow that story to sink in. The invitation from Jesus for those of us who have been marginalized, cast out, vilified, to take our place as the preachers, as the storytellers, to own, yeah, God's doing things in my world too. Whether you want to see that or not, I'm divine too. Which is a whole other sermon, in the sense that the factors that go into what allowed that woman to speak her truth after being marginalized and silenced and made to feel stupid and unholy for so long is just amazing when you think about the effects of internalized oppression. But also, as we breathe, let's just take a moment to receive Jesus's invitation on the other side too, knowing that many of us are intersectional. We have times when it's important for us to stand up and take our seat at the top of the table. And there are times when it's important for us to hold space for our pain and our stories, while also being present to other people's pain and stories in that moment. And I think the big invitation here is for us to have a sociological imagination like Jesus did and does, and always be scanning the situation. None of us are always supposed to be at the head of the table, or none of us are always supposed to be at the foot. It depends on the situation. It always depends on the social dynamics at play. But I think that the big takeaway for me is when we take our place at the foot or the head, it's always going to come at what feels like a risk to us. It's never going to feel natural. I'm sure it didn't feel natural for the woman to speak up and tell her truth, her whole truth. And I'm sure it didn't feel natural for Jairus to sit there and hold on to his pain and be present to his pain without trying to fix it, without taking over the situation, without resorting to the tools of empire to get what he wanted. And when we're involved in this process like Jesus of upending the power dynamic, it's always going to come at great cost to ourselves. That's usually how we know we're doing it. We're doing it when it's uncomfortable and it's hard, and when the rewards of capitalism are not available to us because of the choices that we're making, but the rewards of heaven are abundantly available. So I know I want us to move into a time of Q&R, because I'm sure you guys have some really amazing reflections that I'd love to hear. I want to just give us a moment to, if we already have jotted some questions in the Q&R, that's fine too, but also just take a moment or two to check in with ourselves and ask ourselves, what's burning within me? What do I feel right now? What emotions can I name? Some emotions can I name some sensations in my body? Do I feel antsy? Do I feel relaxed? Do I feel excited? Do I feel despondent? Do I feel angry? And just be present to be present to our bodies, because it's so easy to go straight into conversation mode without being rooted and grounded. So let's just take like 1 minute to just be present to and also to our questions, and take a moment to decide if we want to share our questions with the group, or if we want to write them down and have a spirit moment later where we invite our community to engage with us on those questions. Because there are no bad questions, but some of them are more appropriate for a group context than others. And so this is just a time for discernment for that too. Okay. Jenny, I don't know if there are questions that you want to kick us off with or comments.
There is one question in the Q&A that I'll get to in a minute for you, but I don't really have a question, but I am sitting here reflecting on Jairus sitting in the discomfort of his pain. And something that you said this morning in our previous session, that Sunday is coming, whether we acknowledge that or know it. And Jairus did not know in that moment when we are in those moments.
Yeah, that liminal space. I think so much of whiteness is about avoiding that liminal space. And that's why when I first started really leaning into being to that discomfort as someone who has some privilege, I read every last word I could get of the Palestinian theologians. That's what I would read. They were my lullabies. I would read an hour of Palestinian theology before I'd go to bed, because Palestinians live in a perpetual Holy Saturday. And if we can tap into just an ounce of the intrinsic hope that they have in the resurrection, without any proof that it's ever coming, and really all they feel is the wounds of Friday, that's the loudest, then that's when we can start to do the work of justice from a place where we trust love is the overarching, most dominant, foundational force in the universe. And that's the only place that I can do justice work from. I used to do it from a place of fear, and that lasted. Fear, a really exotic cocktail of self-righteousness and fear. Yeah. And that got me going. I mean, I was doing it for a few years off of that. But then, you burn out. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable, and it's not adaptive. And so I realized, I can do this from a place of love, or I can do it from a place of fear. And so what are the things that are going to help me stay rooted in love? The deepest thing, my largest reality is love. That way I can go out and say all the things that need to be said, and knowing Sunday is a liturgical guarantee. So I don't have to say this because I'm afraid that if I don't say it, no one will know, it won't get said. or if I don't do it, it won't get done, or if I don't stop these people, more people are going to be harmed. Like, that's an incredibly agnostic and lonely way to do this work. Hey, I'm totally happy for people who are agnostic, but I'm not. So it doesn't make sense for me to live that way, you know? And so that space of that liminal space, I'm learning to just sit, just be in it and allow it to be the sweet spot that it really is, because it's really it's a poison to rush out of it. There's something magical that happens there. I mean, Jairus was set free and got to see a cooler miracle, a resurrection of his own child. Jesus doesn't, I'm always amazed, Jesus never disappoints. Like, it's always, wow, something's gonna happen. Might not be what we expected, but something's gonna happen. In this case, cooler miracle.
Yeah. Wow.
Better story to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We have a couple of questions that have been asked. First, from Denise, asks, is there a summary or a framework of questions, prompts, awarenesses to practice as we seek to be last?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think seeking to be last, the big question is how, I think it's almost like you have to try to unlearn, to heal from everything you've been taught. Because it's all, I mean, especially those of us in the US, it's all about being great, exceptional. I mean, American exceptionalism, the way that we grade kids. I mean, we kind of have to rethink everything. We have to rethink what it means to be successful. We have to rethink what it means to feel financially secure. We have to rethink what it means to feel worthy. And so I think the question that I keep coming back to is, where did I learn this? You know, how can I really start to see how much I've been shaped by what's essentially white patriarchy, right? This like ugly mixture of whiteness and kind of patriarchal hierarchy that reduces me to what I produce. And so I think that it's really going down a kind of like a healing from white patriarchy journey in order to really embrace being last and what that looks like. I think another big question that I often ask myself is who's first in my life? Who's first in my life? If I'm last, then who are the people that I'm intentionally following and really like getting into formation around? And for me, because of my social location as an upwardly mobile, cisgendered, sort of white patriarchally approved beauty, that kind of stuff, it's been really important for me to say, okay, if I'm last, who's first? First is Black trans women. And pretty much everything in my life is organized around that. Who I listen to, who I financially support, who I promote, who I center in my work and in my writings, who I spend time with. When I was working on my book, super hardcore, during all of the George Floyd stuff that was going on nationally, I got tons of requests to speak, of course, because, you know, it's like part tokenism, part white people finally trying to do something. I mean, it was a mess. And so I was turning them all down because I was working on my book, and I was just like, you know what, my job is to do that. My role is to write this book, you know? And then I ended up speaking at one really small event, actually pro bono, which is rare for me. But I ended up speaking this event, and one of my friends was like, that's weird, you spoke at that event. I'm like, well, guess who? It was run by Black trans women, and a Black trans woman asked me, and I was like, if there's one group that's gonna get me out of this mindset of I'm just gonna work on my book. So again, everything in my life is formed around, this is the rule, but there's always going to be this that can shift me. And if Black trans women are saying we need to do this in this community right now, then my question is how you say jump, how high? And so the big question is identifying in our lives, which really means doing an analysis of kind of like, you know, I imagine Jesus did constantly. Where do I hold power and privilege? Where do I have a platform? Where do I don't? And then how can I, how can I find the people on the opposite end of the spectrum and participate in following them, being last relative to them? And what does that mean for where I live and where I work? And then the third piece, I say the first piece is questioning, like, how do I even define first and last, essentially, and value in relation to them? And really, white patriarchy is just, like, there's so much there. Which is, the reason why I'm laughing is because and a lot of it I can trace to good old Paul. But then the second piece is, if I'm last, who's first? And then how does my life line up at a table where they're first? And then the third piece I would say is, oh wait, did I just drop it? I think I just dropped it. It'll come back to me if it's meant to come back. It was nice to do a summary.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really helpful to identify in our own lives where those places are. Where do I hold power and privilege, and where do I find those who I need to be holding up and uplifting? Where are the places where I need to step back and listen to someone else's truth.
Like a systematic practice of doing that, you know, like how can I integrate this into every aspect of my life? Because I think just getting away from that intellectual head knowledge, you know, and just saying like, okay, no, what are 3 things I can do every single week that's going to put me in a position where I'm deepening my practice of being last relative to this group? I think sometimes we get overwhelmed because we see so much injustice and we don't know where to plug in. And that's a great discernment question, but it's also like, well, this is all hands on deck. So get involved. Yeah. and integrate it with your life. Make it it's not another hobby. It's a whole new way of thinking and being really.
A question that has come in about early on in this session together, you told the story about going to the baseball meeting and handing out your resume, and Cecilia wonders, are you being critical of yourself for the way that you went so boldly into that room of white men?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I think I was formed to do that. That's a good question. I think what is sad to me is that as a Black woman, I had the room was unwelcoming and hostile to me. And I had to overcome that in order to get an opportunity, which says everything about us contorting ourselves into something that the white patriarchal establishment is going to value. I think that makes me sad because I was more than qualified for those positions that I ended up getting, and without using the tools of empire, I would not have been able to be in those spaces. And I think that was dehumanizing to me. But I look back with a lot of fondness at that me. And I'm a little proud of myself for doing what I could to be a person at that time. I think now that I'm older, and hopefully wiser. I'm learning that trying to work within the rules of empire is not what I want. And I'm aware of that now. And also it's not good for me, and it's not good for the liberation of Black femmes. And so I'm learning, my liminal space is learning to lean into abundance and trust that I can turn down opportunities that do not honor the wholeness of my sacred Black femininity, and trust that there will be a provision for me to do my work in a way that is meaningful and offers my gifts to the world, but is also liberating to me. So that's a big question. You know, there's that's a big trust that I lean into these days, and it's worth it. But it's not. You don't always know where your next, opportunity is gonna lie. I turn down a lot of things now, and it's good.
Good.
It's really good.
Robin asked, you talk about cognitive generosity in several places.
Yeah.
How do we build our ability to be cognitively generous, and how can we invite others to join us in cognitive generosity?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. One thing is the prayer that I prayed earlier. There's so much beautiful work on self-affirmation and just reminding ourselves and being rooted in what's true about ourselves. Oftentimes our cognitive miserliness, it comes from, there's like a spiritual aspect, and then there's also like a practical aspect that also I think is related to spiritual. So what's in the research, the practical aspect is like, we tend to be cognitive misers when we just don't have enough cognitive resources to attend to a situation. And so we rely on stereotypes. And so, I would say that's partially a spiritual thing, because I think in our capitalistic white patriarchal culture, the busier you are, the more important you are. And so the idea of actually slowing down and being present in our communities, practicing what Henry Nouwen would call ministry of presence, actually knowing our neighbors, like not getting so oftentimes not allowing our discomfort of injustice to have us sign up to 8 million different justice things, and then we can't be really present. So I'd say that's like related to spirituality, but part of it is, just the slowing down. But then another thing that helps us to nurture cognitive generosity are those identity and esteem deficits. When I feel good about myself, even if I just feel like I look cute, it's so much easier to compliment another person's looks when I'm like, oh, but I look cute too, so we can all be cute together. You know what I mean? Like, it's just amazing how much, even on something little like that, I'm able to say, I can affirm someone else without it feeling like it's dipping into my resources. And so imagine if we're able to do that around some of the issues that we hold really dear, like our values. And if I'm able to say, I value this particular approach or interpretation of what's going on in the world, but that value is rooted in love and not fear, then I can be generous towards people who have a different value. Because I can trust I'm not the one who needs to go in and tell them a thing or two. If love is big enough, love can communicate that on love's own through the channels that love chooses. And it might be me, if I can come correct, if I can do it in a way that's honoring to myself and to them. But a huge thing that has helped me nurture cognitive generosity that's related to that, again, a spiritual thing, is really dismantling and exorcising my inherited belief in a white male God. because even though I grew up in enough Black church spaces, and I would have always cognitively been like, Jesus wasn't white, God's not necessarily a white man. But if I was so inundated with societal images and beliefs, and who gets to be on the Supreme Court, and who gets voted in as president, and just who tends to lead denominations, everything was pointing towards whiteness and maleness is more holy and sacred and divine than Blackness and femaleness, including scripture, like, in the Song of Solomon, where it says, I am Black, but I am beautiful, which is actually an intentional mistranslation of that. It's really, in the original, it's I am Black and I am beautiful. But during the Renaissance period, when the slave trade was alive and well, translators intentionally mistranslated it to justify the abuse of Black people and to separate Blackness from beauty. And so, I realized part of the reason why I was so cognitively, I had so much cognitive miserliness towards people was because I was afraid that I couldn't trust God to deal with them on God's own self, in God's way, But when I started to embrace an image of the sacred Black feminine, a God who is a Black woman, I'm like, oh, she's got this. Actually, in fact, good luck, y'all. Y'all better straighten up. God's a Black woman, she's gonna handle this. She's gonna do it lovingly and everything, but she's gonna handle this. And so I'm able to say, I don't have to play God when I can trust that God is on my side. And that's been huge for me, huge. And I can be generous towards people and say, and see, you know what, they're hurting, they're afraid. Does that excuse these things? No, but I can see the image of God in them a lot more clearly. And when I do speak to them, if I choose to speak to them from a place of love, I can speak into that and call up a lot more than just calling out.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh gosh. I think we have time for one more question. We're getting close to the end of our time. Kyle asks a question about role models, and that it occurs to him that he says, I can't ask Black and brown people to model stepping back and listening to Black and brown voices. Who is out there who is doing that well? Are there white privileged men who step back and listen and follow, that we can that can be a role model in that sense?
I don't know of any. I don't know what to say. Yeah, okay. Here's what I'll say. The people who are doing it, first of all, almost no one does it. And actually, in the research that I've done on white racial identity development, less than 1% of people ever get to what might be considered fairly developed in their white racial identity. And actually less than 5% of white people even go beyond stage 1 at any point in their lives. So the vast majority of white people are in stage 1, which I call coma in the way that I talk about it. So, but that's part of the issue is like so few people are even on this journey. I will say, I think I might know 2 or 3 white men who I would say are following, would model this decently well. And because they're modeling it so well, they're not famous. And don't ever want to be, and actually would be annoyed that I'm even thinking of them in this way right now, because they would say, oh no, not me, I don't do this well. So I think that says a lot about how much You know, you hear about folks like Robin DiAngelo, who has 4 houses, who makes a bunch of money off oppression of Black people, essentially. You know, like, and so you see a lot of that. Same thing with like Tim Wise and some of these other folks who like, there's a lot more people profiting than truly modeling it. But I will say about these 2 to 3 men that I'm thinking of, their life is, and this term is rife, so I use it knowing that it's rife, but their life has really been a case of downward mobility in terms of an economic sense. They have a lot less power, according to the white patriarchal imagination, than they did when they started this journey. And they have a lot more power in everything that matters than they did when they started this journey. A lot of lost jobs, a lot less clout, but really rich relationships and really rich partnerships with real people on the ground doing amazing work. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. There are a couple of comments, not really questions, but just comments of thanks and wow from hearing you speaking today. Matthew says, just heard one heck of a sermon on Mark 5.
Oh,
Grateful for the word that you have brought to us this day. And Cheryl says, I'm excited when someone tackles a hard gospel. Thank you for doing that and to explain so well how it relates to privilege and marginalization. And hearing that. And Christy said, so grateful for this time and experience. And I think I can echo that for all of us here when I say we are grateful for the time that you have taken out of your day, out of your weekend to be with us today, to wrestle with some of these things with us and to teach us. And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here.
And with that, with our last 2 minutes,
can I leave you with a blessing?
Yes, please.
Blessing? Okay, I'm just gonna make this up, so who knows what's gonna come out, but hopefully it'll be a blessing. Okay. The image of God in me greets the image of God in you, and I am more whole and human and divine because of my time with you all today. And my soul has been communing with all of you. I can feel it, and I can feel it in my gut, even though I can't see all of you. I know you're present, and I'm fed by this communion together. And I honor the work that you all are bringing, not only today, but to your communities. I honor the challenges that only you can talk about. I honor the ways that you've already been marginalized in your communities. I honor your hopes. I honor your desires. I honor your humanity. And every single one of you is needed. Every single one of you has a role to play that is irreplaceable. Only you can offer it to us. And it is needed, and it is wanted, and it is valued. And you get to do the amazing spirit work of discovering what that is and offering it. And I'm just grateful to be just this little teeny tiny part of it, because it's beautiful to see. And I can't wait to hear stories from the PCUSA. So thank you for allowing me to be here, and blessings to you all. You're divine, you really are. And there's room for you. Amen and ashe.
Amen and ashe. Thank you again, Dr. Cleveland, for your time and for being with us this day. Thank you all for your participation and for your questions and reflections today. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.